reveal sharp fangs. Ah! Boches jumped back in fright. Angela, however, recovered quickly. Madam, could you turn me into a vampire too? She asked. Everyone froze. I could, but I won't, Daenerys said firmly. It comes at a heavy price. You're not ready yet. When would I be? Angela asked eagerly. Daenerys glanced at Voldemort, letting him decide. I think you mostly want to heal your leg, Angela. St. Mungo's can. But you said not yet, Angela interrupted, pleading. Mr. Voldemort, please, I'll manage your company accounts. Consider it an early investment. Voldemort looked at Daenerys. She shook her head. Vampires never take payment up front. Show results first. Angela sighed, accepting it reluctantly. The rest of the gathering felt a little awkward, but Bocas kept the conversation flowing smoothly. After seeing Bocas and Angela off, Voldemort explained to Daenerys the purpose of socializing. If it's just a company event, you don't need to come, she said. When we marry, it'll all be ours, Voldemort replied. I don't care for Muggle property, she said firmly. Suit yourself, he nodded, accepting her view. With just the two of them left, the atmosphere grew intimate but slightly tense. Voldemort was prepared. As night fell, he scattered rose petals, lit a candelabra, and brought out a bottle of red liquid for their dinner. I'm very happy, and the blood you prepared is so fresh, Daenerys admitted, her eyes shining with affection. As long as you're happy, Voldemort said, limited by the body that wasn't fully his own. After dinner, he took out the Ravenclaw diadem and handed it to her. This is important to me. Don't touch it. Don't communicate with it. Just protect it well. Voldemort had decided it wasn't safe to keep both Horcruxes together. In the end, he chose to separate this one, and the Oricino Mountains seemed like a good hiding place. I'll protect it. I swear on my vampire honor, Daenerys said solemnly, placing the diadem in a special pouch. The old blood of the Unicorn King? I'll need a refill, Voldemort said when she didn't respond. Oh, almost forgot. She tapped her lips playfully and handed him a bottle of ancient blood. He drank it in one gulp, feeling the heaviness in his soul lift, then let out a satisfied burp. Want to catch a movie tonight? He asked. After last time, no. But maybe a game. I'm starting to like the sport, she replied. There's no game tonight. The earliest is in 3 days, he said, shrugging. No, let's see Luca. He's joined a soccer team, she said, pulling him along. Voldemort didn't care much. Luca was just a kid. But since she was interested, he spent the next few days watching him train from a distance. You don't like Muggles, right? Voldemort asked quietly. He's different, Daenerys said. Quiet, and his sheep are always quiet too. Voldemort tapped his temple. Only then did he realize Daenerys' way of thinking really was unusual. How had he never noticed? He hurried up to the 3rd floor of the Riddle building, now fully acquired by his foundation, and strode straight into the research lab. Several scientists, clearly about to leave, were already gathered there. Mr. Riddle, this is Professor Crowley, Boches said. Voldemort nodded, shaking the hand of a tall, heavily balding man. Crowley's expression carried a flicker of impatience, but Voldemort let it slide. After all, this was a protege of Sir Roger Penrose of the Royal Society. A man like that had the credentials to be arrogant. Let's be direct, Mr. Riddle, Crowley said before Voldemort could speak. Temporal properties don't exist. The answers are all in the hypothesis book, along with every other speculation. Voldemort nodded, picking up the thick volume, heavier than the notes he'd once given Boches, and flipped to the relevant section. There was far too much to digest in one sitting. So what do you believe is the real cause of that magic's existence? Voldemort asked, still scanning the page. When no answer came, he looked up, puzzled. Crowley frowned. The researchers behind him wore the same impatient look. Is there a problem? Voldemort asked. I believe you can find the answer yourself in the hypothesis book, sir, Crowley said, deliberately skipping Voldemort's surname. Our work here is done. We're leaving. He stood, ready to go, but Voldemort raised a hand to stop them. Boches, have we offended Professor Crowley or his team, or insulted his mentor? No, sir. Are we behind on payment? No, sir. Sir Penrose was paid in full. Then has our collaboration term expired? No, sir. The agreement runs for up to a year. Voldemort nodded slowly, turning back to Crowley, brow furrowed. Then where exactly are you in such a hurry to go, Professor? I've had enough of this blasted project, Crowley muttered. It's meaningless, a complete waste of. A waste of the 30 million pounds you've been given? Voldemort cut in, voice going cold before erupting in fury. Sit down, all of you. If you don't give me a complete explanation of your theories, none of you are leaving this room alive. He was beyond angry. He'd funneled 30 million pounds into this project through the Foundation. 30 million in 1991 money. In another country, that sum could multiply several times over. And more than money, he'd invested genuine hope in these theories. Yet here they were, acting as if they were only ticking boxes. If that was the case, then his 30 million, his expectations, and the future of his magic, damn it, was he just too tired to raise his wand, or had they all gone mad? Sir, let me speak to them, Bochis said darkly, knowing well Voldemort's reputation. You have 10 minutes. If you can't persuade them, you know what happens next, Voldemort said, walking out without another glance. If it weren't for the risk of damaging their intellect, Lockhart's example still fresh in his mind, he would have used a memory charm already. The only thing restraining him now was his respect for scientists. Believe it or not, shouting was the gentlest punishment he was willing to give. If these were Death Eaters, the Cruciatus Curse would already be flying. 10 minutes later, Voldemort returned to the lab, face still hard. The scientists still looked displeased, but their posture was cooperative. He didn't ask Bochis what had been said. The outcome was all that mattered. Let me explain why the repairing charm doesn't involve temporal properties, Crowley began. Voldemort nodded, attentive. First, matter is composed of molecules, ions, and atoms. You understand that, yes? I do. Good. You know that atoms can convert to energy via mass energy equivalents, but fundamentally they don't disappear. Their type, number, and mass remain the same. Voldemort frowned slightly, dragging up knowledge buried in his memory. They only change form or produce new atoms. You follow? I do. So when an object breaks, some atoms may separate from the whole or transform into other types of atoms. Clear so far? Yes, Voldemort said, while Bochis listened quietly. Let's set aside the separation case and focus on transformation first. Chapter 97, The Composite Sine Wave Hypothesis. Crowley gestured as he explained. If the repairing charm really had space-time properties, then when the original broken object is restored, the atoms it lost, and that have since transformed, would have to be reverted to their original form. You mean the atoms that have changed and merged into something else would just vanish from where they are now? Voldemort asked. Yes, if the spell truly bent space-time, that would be inevitable. Voldemort nodded, beginning to see his point. And if that's the case, then repairing something truly ancient would mean pulling back every atom it once had. Who knows where they've gone by now? The process could kill many witches and wizards outright. Voldemort found himself agreeing. The idea that the repairing charm had space-time effects was scientifically impossible. Professor Crowley's lecture was nothing short of brilliant. With just a few clear arguments, he dismissed the idea that the repairing charm had intrinsic space-time qualities, which only increased Voldemort's confidence. So, in your view, Voldemort asked, what is the true nature of the repairing charm? That's not an easy question, Crowley admitted. We've proposed many hypotheses, energy aggregation traits, magnetic field repulsion effects, and others. They're all recorded in the hypotheses book. Voldemort nodded. He had seen several of these theories listed in the book's table of contents. I can't go through every single one with you, Crowley continued. Please understand, sir, it's not laziness. There's just a lot of technical material here. Explaining all of it would require many lessons, and that would be far too complicated. Voldemort considered this and agreed. After all, his academic record had never been stellar. But I can share our final hypothesis. Unlike the others, it doesn't have glaring flaws. Crowley flipped to a chapter and handed the book to Voldemort. The title read, The Composite Sine Wave Hypothesis of the Repairing Charm. Sine wave? Voldemort frowned. Yes. Let me explain as simply as possible, Crowley said, clearing his throat. Voldemort nodded for him to continue. All matter is essentially projected energy, an aggregation of waves. From a quantum perspective, the smallest components we see, neutrons, positrons, and electrons, are all that exists. Voldemort struggled to keep up, nodding or shaking his head at the pauses. So what we perceive as solid objects are really images formed by energy waves. Does that make sense so far? Voldemort wasn't entirely sure, but he gestured for Crowley to continue. And what is a collection of energy waves that hasn't formed an image? That's information. And the simplest form of information is the sine wave. Every wave, essentially, is a sine wave. I remember sine curves from math, but I've forgotten the details, Voldemort said, rubbing his temple. A sine wave is the purest signal, with a single frequency component. Its shape resembles the sine curve, hence the name. Any complex signal is actually many sine waves of different frequencies and amplitudes combined, Crowley explained. Voldemort nodded. This part was clear to him. A sine wave represents something original, simple, and fundamental. Understand? Voldemort nodded again. Crowley continued. We believe the repair charm is a composite sine wave. It identifies the object's original composite sine wave information, then uses magic to restore it to its original state. Where do the missing atoms come from? Voldemort asked after thinking for a moment. They're sourced nearby and transformed. There are plenty of atoms in the air, Crowley explained, pointing to a page in the book. It looks like time rewinds when the charm is used, but that's an illusion. The spell finds nearby atoms that originally composed the object, perfect for restoration. Voldemort nodded but still looked puzzled. Then why restore the object to its original form? The composite sine wave changes as the object is damaged. How does the charm locate the earliest complete state? That's where the wizard's emotions come in, Crowley said, flipping the page. The caster must think of the object's original form, wishing it to return to its most complete state. Voldemort raised an eyebrow, intrigued but skeptical. So channeling thought and emotion is enough? Ordinary people can't do it, Crowley sneered. But absurdly talented wizards? Their thoughts have unique qualities. Voldemort ignored the disdain, noticing the idea of a wizard's unique thought. What exactly made it special? It was a mystery worth exploring, but not yet. First, he wanted to fully understand the repair charm. What roles do the incantation, wand movements, and magical power play, he asked. The spell and wand movements create the composite sine wave. That's why the incantation has varying pitch and the wand requires a certain rhythm, Crowley said, waving his hand as if casting. And the magical power? Voldemort pressed. That's the energy needed to complete the process. The law of conservation of energy demands it, like fuel for a car or electricity for a train. Voldemort wanted to test it immediately, but was held back by the others. Let me summarize to make sure I've understood, he said respectfully. Go ahead, Crowley replied. Voldemort spoke carefully. The repair charm is a composite sine wave. The incantation and wand movements imitate this complex pattern. Magical power drives the wave through the object, allowing it to function. Emotions lock on to the most complete segment of the object's information. Crowley nodded, giving a thumbs up, though his eyes hinted at skepticism. Voldemort ignored it. Muggles rarely understand magic anyway. Exactly, and magical power ensures the process reaches its full effect. I see no flaws so far, Voldemort said. But why doesn't it work on living beings, he asked. There are two possibilities, Crowley said, holding up two fingers. One, the composite sine wave of the repair charm itself isn't capable of acting on living creatures. Voldemort nodded, thinking about healing spells. Their incantations and wand movements were completely different. The second reason, Crowley went on, is that living creatures have independent consciousness, far too complex for something like this. It would likely require a much more intricate composite sine wave. That made Voldemort's eyes light up. Both arguments were sound. Repair charms and healing spells were worlds apart. Repair charms were beginner level. Healing spells were advanced magic with strict learning requirements. So, Voldemort said, if someone could determine the composite sine wave of the repair charm, would that mean the fixed incantation and wand movements aren't actually necessary? That they could just use magic itself to simulate the sine wave and cast the spell? He thought immediately of the silencing charm and wandless magic, both fitting that idea perfectly. In theory, yes, Crowley replied. But composite sine waves are incredibly complex. The words and wand movements are shortcuts. They simplify the process, like using a computer to do calculations your brain could never manage. Without them, it would be extremely difficult, maybe impossible. Voldemort thought of all the wizards who couldn't manage the silencing charm even after a lifetime of trying, let alone wandless magic. Thank you. I think I understand now. He rose and shook Crowley's hand. Earlier, he'd considered wiping their memories, but thinking about possible future cooperation and the risk of damage from a memory charm, he decided against it. Thank you for your generous support, Crowley said, sounding genuinely pleased. I'd like to share one last thought. If that other world really exists, though I doubt it, when a wizard fully masters the composite sine wave of a spell, they'll understand its essence. That understanding will give them far greater control over magic. Why do you believe that, Professor? There's nothing in the material I provided to suggest it, Voldemort said, frowning. Emotions, Mr. Riddle, Crowley answered while packing his things. If emotions can wield such power, then the essence must be even stronger. Voldemort stayed silent, watching Crowley and his team leave. Emotions again. It always came back to that. And now essence. Maybe it was worth considering, but without proof, he wouldn't draw conclusions. Chapter 98, Christmas. Bochis had given Voldemort a list of candidates for his research project. Since Stephen Hawking was unavailable, Voldemort had settled for someone in his circle, Sir Roger Penrose, who had co-created the mathematical framework of modern cosmology with Hawking. From the results, Voldemort was satisfied. Even without the master himself, Penrose's protégés had real ability. Back at Hogwarts, Hypothesis book under his arm, Voldemort buried himself in research. Compared to the cryptic magical tomes he'd read before, this thick volume of scientific theory was no easier to digest. Time passed in waves until one morning he woke to find a pile of gifts at his bedside and realized it was Christmas. He'd bought nothing for anyone. Sigh, knowledge really is the root of all suffering. He sat up, exhaling, and began sorting through the gifts. He'd have to send replies and excuses for his forgetfulness. Quidditch glory? Professor McGonagall. I like football, not Quidditch. One book won't change that. He tossed it onto the shelf. How to care for adult teeth. Miss Know-It-All, maybe start with your own front teeth. Another shelf decoration. An elegant scarf, nicely chosen. Potter actually has some taste. He tried it on in front of the mirror, nodding in approval. Then, who sent me a note? He unfolded the paper. Open quote, Dear Professor Quirrell, your students Fred and George sincerely wish you a Merry Christmas and hope you'll send us a gift in return, preferably the note you confiscated. It's a memory of our youth. Your most obedient students, Fred and George Weasley. Close quote. He burned it on the spot. How to be a Ravenclaw. Headmistress Flitwick, just how deep is your grudge against me? More useless books. Did he look like someone desperate to study? The later gifts were less baffling. Hagrid's pancakes, Percy's embroidered handkerchief, Kettleburn's sweets, until another note appeared. This one was written in elegant, flowing script. Open quote, Dear Quirrell, as a Christmas gift, I'm inviting you on an extraordinary magical learning journey. I believe it will benefit you. You may choose the time, but please notify me in advance. Your headmaster, Albus Dumbledore. Close quote. Now that was a gift worth having. Voldemort sat down at his desk to reply. Open quote, Dear Headmaster Dumbledore, I'm glad to receive your letter and thank you for the gift. I have one for you as well. Tickets to the Christmas match at Manchester United's home stadium. If you have time tomorrow afternoon, perhaps after the game you could take me on that magical journey. Your ever faithful student, Vold. Close quote. Thwack! He smacked his forehead. The fatigue from wrestling with the Hypothesis book was catching up to him. Voldemort grabbed a fresh sheet of parchment, carefully recopied the letter, and got it ready to send. Once that was done, he returned to his bed and resumed opening gifts. Nearly every professor had given him something, except Snape. Students had given presents too, even Ron, though none were particularly valuable. Voldemort took note of every single one. Next, he began selecting gifts to send back, each accompanied by a letter explaining how his magical research had absorbed so much of his time. To anyone else, it might have sounded suspicious, but Voldemort's unwavering dedication to magic made it entirely believable. No one would question him. He spent half the day on this, and by noon, a reply from Dumbledore arrived. The letter was short, saying simply that it was no problem and that Voldemort could visit his office whenever he was ready. Pocketing the note, Voldemort groomed himself and dressed sharply. Tonight was the Christmas feast in the Great Hall, and skipping it would have been too antisocial. Quirrell, Your gift arrived late, Headmistress Flitwick called as he approached the classroom table. I forgot. I've been buried in magical research lately, Voldemort explained, giving a casual wave to Hagrid in the distance. One drink is punishment, Quirrell. Hagrid says you can hold your liquor. Dean Flitwick teased with a mischievous grin. Voldemort shrugged, raised his glass, and downed it in one go. Tonight he would indulge instead of working through the last 3 unread hypotheses in the Book of Speculations. Quirrell, you haven't had a drink with me in ages, Hagrid called, lumbering over with a tankard nearly the size of a fishbowl. Not going home sober tonight, Voldemort replied, clinking tankards before finishing another drink. Later, we'll head to your hut. Too many students here. Hagrid nodded eagerly and began inviting Dean Flitwick and Professor Kettleburn. Both agreed, and soon Professor Trelawney wandered over and invited herself along. Hagrid didn't object. While Hagrid continued rounding up other professors, Voldemort turned his attention to the Christmas feast. The roast chicken was plump but slightly dry. The roast beef was solid. The little sausages and buttered peas were fragrant and rich, and he finished with a hearty, warming bowl of soup. Stuffed and slightly uncomfortable, Voldemort followed the students outside to watch the fireworks. See you tomorrow, Quirrell. I'm looking forward to the match, someone called. Near the door, Dumbledore appeared, wearing a wide-brimmed lady's hat adorned with fresh flowers, smiling warmly. And I look forward to your class, Headmaster, Voldemort replied, returning the smile before stepping out into the snowy night. On the lawn, students clustered in small groups, lighting firecrackers in every imaginable way. Buried in the snow, boldly held in their hands, or aimed straight at classmates. Hey, Professor, where's our Christmas present? The twins called, bounding over. Percy's coming, Voldemort said, pointing into the distance. We took his badge, they continued. His prefect badge, so he's chasing us. But we hid it in a snowman, and forgot which one. They doubled over laughing and ran off, leaving Voldemort quietly amused. Professor, you were supposed to stop them, Percy grumbled as he passed. Voldemort flicked his wand with a smirk. An invisible rope caught Percy's ankle, sending him sprawling into the snow. The twins paused only to laugh and gave Voldemort a thumbs up. Professor, Percy started to protest again. A joke, Percy. Lighten up, it's Christmas, Voldemort said, waving him off as the chase resumed. Such carefree days, Voldemort thought, heading toward Hagrid's hut, already anticipating the night's heavy drinking. By the time he returned to the castle, his eyes were hazy from alcohol. He never let himself get completely drunk, but the effects were undeniable. Quirrell, I'll see Kettleburn home. Trelawney's yours, Dean Flitwick said at the base of the stairs. Between them, Voldemort and Flitwick were the most sober. Remarkably, the small man could drink on par with Hagrid, and even Voldemort couldn't quite match him. Of course, Dean, Voldemort agreed, half supporting Trelawney as they ascended the stairs. Quirrell, one more drink, Trelawney slurred, breath heavy with alcohol. Let's talk more. I enjoy your company. You're not like the others, not like them. Voldemort gave a helpless smile. A few half-sincere compliments at the table had been enough for her to latch on. They'd drunk far more together than he had intended. Sybil, you've had enough. I'll see you to your quarters. Don't make a fuss, he said calmly, guiding her onward. I'm not drunk, Quirrell. Really, I'm not. I know they all look down on me, but you don't. Eyes don't lie, especially not to someone who can see fate, she insisted. Voldemort forced a polite smile and stayed silent, avoiding another endless monologue. But he underestimated her persistence. She chattered on relentlessly as they reached the 4th floor. There they ran into Filch on patrol. Quirrell, you're a good man, Filch said sincerely, watching him steady Trelawney with care. Hogwarts hasn't had a professor like you in a long time. Another one full of grudging admiration, Voldemort thought silently. Everyone's fine, Filch. Don't say that, Voldemort replied. It's Christmas. Make sure you get some rest too. Don't overwork yourself. I can't, Kilo. Christmas is when students cause the most trouble. You should be the one resting first. Before he could respond, a sharp, piercing howl echoed down the corridor. Both turned their heads. The library, Filch. Looks like you've got your hands full, Voldemort said. Bloody students. Can't get a moment's peace, even on Christmas, Filch grumbled, though there was a smug little curl to his lips. I'm off then, Kilo. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas, Voldemort replied, but Filch was already stomping away toward the library, clearly thrilled at the chance to catch some hapless rule-breaker. Good luck, Harry, Voldemort thought. He already knew exactly where that scream had come from. Harry Potter had been prowling around at night and opened a forbidden book. But Voldemort had no desire to cross paths with him. Scarf or no scarf, they were enemies by fate. Come on, Trelawney, stop staring, Voldemort murmured, steadying her as they headed upstairs. Be careful, Kilo. That one will hurt you, she said in a wide-eyed, dreamy voice. He didn't answer, assuming it was just more of her tipsy rambling, and guided her toward the North Tower. We're here, Sybil. I think you can make it to your rooms from here, Voldemort said, stopping outside her office. I can. She nodded, but instead of going in, she leaned lightly against him, tilting her head up. Do I look pretty? Voldemort felt like he'd just seen a ghost, but he couldn't simply shove her away. She was delicate, and rejection had to be handled gently. If you dressed up a bit, something a little more conventional, you'd be beautiful. Now, Sybil, I should get back to my office. He gave a small, polite smile. Stay with me a little longer? Consider it a Christmas present, she said softly. He wanted to refuse, but the misty sorrow in her big eyes, awkward as it was genuinely pitiful. I can't say no, Sybil, but let's just talk. Nothing more, all right? He said quietly. Of course, I've got some wonderful tea. Came from that place with pandas. That comment troubled him more than it should have, but at least she really did just mean tea. They chatted for a while. Light conversation, nothing unusual. Voldemort drank 3 cups before finally standing to leave. The tea was excellent for sobering up. Trelawney walked him to the door. Our paths will cross again, Kilo. I can see it, she said. Voldemort brushed it off and started down the stairs toward his office. As he rounded the corner on the 5th floor staircase, his left shoulder bumped into someone, except no one was there. Then came a sharp gasp, and out of nowhere, a hand shot into view, clawing the air like a drowning man. Ah! The hand clamped around Voldemort's left one, sending a sharp sting through it. He hissed in pain. He knew exactly who it was. It all happened too fast for him to react properly, but there was no mistaking it. Wingardium Leviosa. He aimed his wand at the empty space, and slowly Harry emerged, the invisibility cloak sliding off. Voldemort quickly pulled his left hand back out of sight. Harry? He asked, feigning surprise while trying not to wince. It's me, Professor. Sorry for scaring you, Harry said, his eyes pleading to be put down. Voldemort didn't answer right away. He heard quick steps below, but after Harry spoke, they faded. You gave me quite a start, Harry. Was Filch chasing you earlier? Voldemort asked, lowering him to the floor and glancing toward the stairs, empty. Yes, I was looking for some study material, Harry lied, but Voldemort didn't care enough to press. Go get some sleep. I'd hate for you to lose house points over Christmas. Harry nodded quickly, snatching up his cloak. Voldemort paused, then said, I'll walk you back. If we meet Filch, I'll say I'm tutoring you. No need for your Christmas to be ruined. Okay, Professor. Thank you, Harry said with surprising sincerity. Voldemort nodded, wand in hand, scanning their surroundings. Merlin, this act is exhausting, and my left hand still hurts like hell, he thought. Chapter 100, The Devil Within. Magic dusk settled over Florence as Voldemort followed Dumbledore through pools of golden light under the vaulted arches of the National Academy of Fine Arts, stepping into a grand Gothic hall crowned with a domed ceiling. Fresh from the football match, Voldemort was about to receive a lesson from the headmaster himself. Behold, Michelangelo's David, a masterpiece of perfection, Dumbledore said, moving with the grace of a conductor. Suddenly, the 4-meter statue leapt down from its pedestal, circling them in a slow, elegant arc. To this day, I can't replicate his form perfectly, but believe me, if you could transform something like this, even with its flaws, your transfiguration would reach mastery. With a flick of his wand, the statue raised its sling as if ready to hurl a stone. Voldemort glanced at the plaque. His proportions are deliberately exaggerated, the thighs too long, so it's not quite true to human anatomy. Doesn't that count as a flaw? That's another matter entirely, Quirrell, Dumbledore said, restoring the statue to its pedestal. Then he extended a hand. Take hold of me. Voldemort took it, and in the next moment they shimmered out of sight, reappearing in a bustling corridor lined with countless sculptures. Transfiguration follows the same artistry as sculpture, Quirrell. Do you understand why I'm showing you this? You mean that if I become a master sculptor, or even a skilled imitator, my transfiguration could improve dramatically? Dumbledore nodded. You can't imagine how stunned I was the first time I stepped into Florence. Truly, it's a haven for wizards who practice transfiguration. Voldemort scanned the hall, dozens of sculptures visible in every direction. I always recommend travel, not just through the dark forest, which has its merits, but to experience beauty and expand your horizons. It helps develop a wizard's talent by analogy, Dumbledore explained, stepping forward. Voldemort nodded and followed closely. Look at that statue of Perseus over there. What do you feel? Dumbledore asked, pointing to the far end of the hall. Calm, boldness, and maybe a hint of compassion? Voldemort answered. Compassion. Very good. You've sensed the deeper meaning in his expression. Let's get closer. They weaved through the crowd until they stood directly beneath the statue. From this angle, what do you see now? Dumbledore asked. Looking up, Voldemort first noticed the Medusa's head in Perseus's hand, its closed eyes reminding him of a basilisk. Then his gaze shifted to Perseus's face, which appeared very different from the distant view. From below, Perseus's lowered eyes seemed to meet his own, a faint, victorious smile on his lips. Pride, confidence, the thrill of victory? Voldemort guessed, uncertain, glancing at Dumbledore, who watched the statue with a solemn expression. Emotion, the devil within magic, Dumbledore murmured, lowering his gaze. His tall figure seemed to envelop Voldemort. Remember this, child. Control the emotions in your magic, or you risk falling into boundless darkness. Those two statues are cautionary tales. Voldemort forced a small smile. Headmaster, I think you may be overestimating me. Dumbledore chuckled softly, saying nothing more. Back to magic, Quirrell, he continued. David's elongated legs and the emotional subtleties in that statue are all meant to convey feeling. Voldemort listened intently. At first, Dumbledore had discussed technique, how sculptural skill could elevate transfiguration to mastery. Now he was speaking of something deeper. If a wizard can infuse emotion, or rather a spirit, into their transfiguration. Dumbledore frowned slightly but pressed on. Then their magic can leap from mastery to the very pinnacle of the craft. How high is that pinnacle? Voldemort asked. One of the rare few in the world, Dumbledore answered gravely. But be careful which emotions you choose. Voldemort nodded obediently, silently promising not to stray down a dark path. Dumbledore then led him on a tour of the sculptures in the Lord's Square, explaining both the techniques used to create them and the emotions the artists had infused into their work. So, if these sculptors were wizards, they'd all be masters of transfiguration? Voldemort asked. Undoubtedly, Dumbledore confirmed. But look at Muggle history. How many sculptors truly reached mastery? Voldemort pondered and nodded. True, elites are always few, and those who became masters endured hardship and struggle. Rising from suffering, they created immortal legacies. Even in a different field, who could doubt their indomitable will? So, Headmaster, are you teaching me both technique and emotion? Voldemort asked. The sun had already set, and the square had thinned. They sat together on a bench to rest, and Voldemort turned to him. No, I've said it before. I'm here to teach you how to think laterally, my boy, Dumbledore replied. His gaze swept over the countless sculptures scattered across the square, that showing his clear fondness. You must find your own path. Your talent, temperament, and interests all shape your magic. Voldemort nodded, feeling enlightened. Even with the fragments of memories from his lingering soul, this broadened his perspective. Then let me show you a few more sculptures. Consider this the end of today's lesson, and a warning. With that, Dumbledore led him on. Soon they reached a sculpture depicting Pluto abducting Persephone, its intricate details stirring desire and unease in the viewer. Dumbledore used it to explain the dangers of uncontrolled emotions. If such feelings could influence others so strongly, imagine the temptation for the individual harboring them. Having razed villages himself, Voldemort understood all too well the toll rage and killing took on the spirit. He nodded solemnly, a silent vow never to follow the path of the serpent-faced monster. It's late, and the lesson is over. I'm heading back to Hogwarts. What about you? Dumbledore asked. Voldemort began, but before he could finish, a weary-looking owl arrived. its eyes heavy with exhaustion, as if it had traveled a great distance. "That one's been chasing you for some time," Dumbledore said, taking the owl and handing Voldemort the letter it carried. He pulled out some food to feed the exhausted bird. "I've moved you around so many times, it's worn out." Voldemort smiled wryly, sympathizing silently with the poor creature, and unfolded the letter. "Is something wrong?" Dumbledore asked, noticing his hesitation. "It's Hermione. She invited me over tomorrow afternoon. Her father wants a wizard friend, and I foolishly agreed," Voldemort said with some resignation. "That little girl never gave up easily." "Then go. Consider it a home visit," Dumbledore encouraged, smiling. Voldemort forced a small smile but said nothing. Chapter 101. "I never expected, Professor Quirrell, that a wizard would know so much about the stock market," Mr. Granger said, clearly surprised. His wife nodded in agreement as she brought over some fruit. Hermione stood close by, beaming with pride at her professor. "He really did seem to know everything. That's partly thanks to my Muggle background and partly from my years researching Muggle studies as a professor," Voldemort said, picking up a slice of kiwi and chewing slowly. "The wizarding world doesn't understand the Muggle one as well as it thinks, so you should avoid generalizing." The visit was going well. The Grangers were polite, well-educated, and easy to talk to. Conversation flowed naturally from the dinner table to the living room. "I've always had a question, Professor," Mr. Granger began, looking slightly hesitant. "I hope you don't mind, but I have to ask." "Of course," Voldemort said, setting down his fork. "I'm here to answer your questions. It's about Hermione's future. After she graduates, will she stay in the wizarding world? We really don't know much about it, so—" He trailed off, exchanging a worried glance with his wife. "A parent's concern runs deep," Voldemort said with a pause. "From what I've seen of Hermione, she's more than capable of thriving in the magical world and doing very well." "But you told her to consider a Muggle university after Hogwarts," Mr. Granger pressed gently. "That must be for a reason." Voldemort nodded. "The Muggle world's education system is more developed. Hogwarts students graduate at 17 or 18, too young, in my opinion, to be pushed straight into adult life. Of course, that's just my view." The Grangers exchanged another glance, clearly in agreement. "But without exams, getting into a good university would be difficult," Mr. Granger pointed out. "She'll have been gone from the Muggle world for years." "I have contacts in the Muggle world," Voldemort said without hesitation. "If necessary, I can help her get into a respectable university." "Without exams?" Mrs. Granger asked in surprise. He smiled and nodded but didn't elaborate. No need to share too much of his long-term plans. "That's very kind of you," Mr. Granger said quickly. "If the time comes, we'll support her completely." "Of course," Voldemort said. "But it must also be Hermione's choice. Once wizarding children graduate from Hogwarts, they're adults in our world and free to decide their own paths." He glanced at Hermione, who grinned wide enough to look like a prairie dog. "We'll respect her choice, Mrs. Last," Granger said at once, and her husband nodded. "I've always wondered, Professor, why do wizards hide themselves? Is it to avoid hurting Muggles?" Mr. Granger asked, more relaxed now. "Actually, it's the opposite," Voldemort replied, picking up his fork again. "They're afraid of Muggles hurting them." The Grangers looked stunned, Hermione even more so. "You can't be serious?" she blurted. "Read your magical history, Hermione. The evidence is there," Voldemort said, savoring another bite of kiwi. "But magic is so powerful," Mr. Granger protested. "How could Muggles hurt wizards?" "The witch hunts of the Middle Ages. You've heard of them?" Voldemort asked. "Of course," Mr. Granger said. "But I thought they were a farce, just poor unlucky." He paused, glancing at Hermione. "Squibs," she supplied. "That's not it," Voldemort said, setting his fork down again, his eyes lingering on the kiwi plate. "For centuries, wizarding education followed the old master-apprentice model. Even after Hogwarts was founded, that didn't change much." The Grangers leaned forward, listening. "The problem was specialization. A wizard could be a brilliant potioneer, but hopeless in a fight, sometimes weaker than an ordinary person. Others knew only domestic magic. So," he glanced at Mrs. Granger, "any more kiwi, ma'am? It's excellent." "Yes, of course," she said, rising at once. "Thank you." Voldemort smiled. "So these wizards couldn't defend themselves?" Mr. Granger asked. Not against ordinary civilians, against soldiers, monster hunters, and the church's knights. It was a violent time, and eventually wizards decided to withdraw from the public eye. He chuckled softly. Officially, it was to protect muggles. The Grangers struggled to process that. A wizard could conjure almost anything with the flick of a wand, yet they'd retreated? The retreat must have been a huge blow, like Hermione said. Voldemort nodded. Especially for pure-blood families. Many were tied to the nobility and owned vast estates. They had to cut all those ties. So the law is really to protect weaker wizards? Mr. Granger asked. European powers rarely wiped out their nobility, Voldemort said. Purebloods lost their lands and titles and still feel wronged. That's why internal conflict has been simmering ever since. Mrs. Granger returned with a fresh plate of kiwi, which Voldemort accepted with genuine appreciation. How bad are these conflicts? Mr. Granger asked, his concern returning. My daughter's part of that world, after all. Hogwarts is very safe, Voldemort assured him. Dumbledore is there. Voldemort suddenly remembered the basilisk planned for next year, but quickly dismissed the thought. There was no way he'd allow any notebooks into the school again. He firmly said, yes, very safe. Dumbledore is there. Mr. Granger nodded, though a trace of worry lingered in his eyes as he glanced at Hermione. Mrs. Granger seemed more relaxed, trusting the headmaster Voldemort mentioned. Hermione had already told her about his skill. Thank you for your hospitality, Grangers. When you have time, let Hermione show you around Diagon Alley. The wizarding world isn't as mysterious as it seems, Voldemort said. Having eaten and drunk his fill, he prepared to leave, sensing that if the conversation dragged on, Hermione might simply quit school. Oh, very well. Thank you for coming, Professor Quirrell. It's been a pleasure meeting you, Mr. and Mrs. Granger said, shaking his hand one by one before seeing him out. I'll escort the professor, Hermione said firmly, cutting off her parents. Mom, Dad, you stay inside. She ran after Voldemort, following his footsteps out the door without allowing her parents to argue. 5,000 bookmarks and listings. 500 paid subscriptions unlock an extra chapter, and for every additional 50 subscriptions, one more chapter is added. Future updates, at least 3 chapters daily, all released just after midnight for a smoother reading experience. Thoughts, writing, deleting, rewriting, over and over, yet nothing really gets written. Playing the victim feels pretentious. Begging for subscriptions seems pointless. So I'll just say thanks. Thanks to the editor for featuring this story. Without it, these 5,000 bookmarks wouldn't exist. Thanks to the readers, no need to repeat it here. After 10 chapters, I've expressed my gratitude under each one already. I don't know what awkward situations I'll face once it's listed without a feature, but here's to pushing through. Here's a snippet of lyrics. Please remove if infringing. Where exactly is the world full of flowers? If it truly exists, I will go there. I want to stand where the highest peaks rise, no matter if they're cliffs or sheer drops. Live with passion, love with force, even if it means giving everything, life and soul. I don't seek anyone's approval, only to be true to myself. I've never chosen to give up on my ideals, even in the days when I'm battered and worn. Maybe I lack talent, but I hold the innocence of dreams. I will prove it with my entire life. Maybe my hands are clumsy, but I'm willing to keep searching, giving all my youth without regrets. Running forward, facing cold stares and mockery, how can one feel the vastness of life without hardships? Fate won't let us kneel and beg, even if blood soaks my embrace. I keep running with the pride of a child. Life's brilliance can only be seen through perseverance. Better to burn fiercely than to barely survive. One day it will sprout again. The future, dazzling and enchanting, always calls to me. Even if pain is my only companion, I'll press on bravely. I want to sail where the sea is bluest, no matter if I can return or not. Feeling down after failure is the mark of a coward. As long as there's breath left, clench your fists tight. Before dawn breaks, we must be braver, waiting for the brightest moment of sunrise. Running forward, facing cold stares and mockery, how can one feel the vastness of life without hardships? Fate won't let us kneel and beg. Even if blood soaks my embrace, I keep running with the pride of a child. Life's brilliance can only be seen through perseverance. Better to burn fiercely than to barely survive. For the beauty within my heart, I won't compromise until I grow old.